On June 6, 1996, in a suburb of Dallas, Texas, there was a crime of unprecedented horror. An intruder entered this home and attacked 2 young children along with their mother. Police hoped that science would lead them to the assailant.
My babies are dying, they're dead!
Darren and Darlie Routier were a young couple in their mid-20s with 3 children, 6-year-old Devin, 5-year-old Damon, and 8-month-old Drake. Darren Routier was a successful entrepreneur. Darlie stayed at home to care for the children.
This was a young couple who had made good. Darren owned his own business. In 1995, he had made close to $300,000 in his business. He repaired mainframe computers, had some extensive contracts with government agencies.
On the night of the attack, Darren Routier was asleep upstairs with 8-month-old Drake. Downstairs in the family room, the 2 older boys fell asleep watching television. Their mother, Darlie, was asleep on the sofa. Around 2:30 in the morning, an intruder stabbed the children, then woke Darlie, who felt a knife at her throat. After a brief struggle, the intruder fled, and Darlie called police.
911, what is your emergency? Somebody came in while I was sleeping. Me and my little boys are sleeping downstairs. Somebody came in, stabbed my baby, stabbed me. I looked up, I was fighting. He ran out to the garage, threw a knife down. My babies are dying, they're dead. Oh my God!
When paramedics arrived, 6-year-old Devin was dead. 5-year-old Damon was barely alive, but he died en route to the hospital. Darlie was taken into surgery to repair her neck wound, which missed her carotid artery by only 2 centimeters. She also suffered a stab wound to her arm. Paramedics noticed that Darlie's panties were missing.
When I asked her if she thought she'd been raped, her answer to me was, well, when I woke up, I felt some pressure down there. That was her answer.
But a rape test was negative. Darlie described the assailant as a white male about 6 feet tall, wearing a black shirt, jeans, and a baseball cap. A screen in the Routier's garage had been cut. Darlie said the intruder dropped the murder weapon onto the floor as he fled. In the alley, 2 houses away, police discovered a bloody sock. The motive did not appear to be robbery.
Between the kitchen and the room where the murders occurred, there was 13 rings and a gold lady's watch laying out there. So it indicated to us if it was in fact a burglary or a robbery that had gone bad, there was nothing. There was valuables out there to be taken and nothing was disturbed.
Now we don't know why. Now we know that this is a sick individual that took absolutely nothing from our house, but took the 2 most important things that were important to us away from us.
The most prominent evidence at the crime scene was blood. Forensic scientists hoped the blood spatter pattern would tell them more about these horrific murders. When police examined the murder scene, it appeared the assailant entered the Routier home through a screened window in the garage. Darlie Routier said she was asleep when the intruder murdered her 2 boys. Darlie woke when she felt a knife to her throat. There was a struggle, and the assailant fled through the garage. Darlie said he dropped the murder weapon onto the floor on his way out. Darren Routier said he was asleep upstairs with 8-month-old Drake and woke when he heard glass breaking.
When he walked into the family room where the detectives were waiting for him, the first thing out of his mouth was not, "How is Damon? How is Darlie?" It is, "Have you seen Darlie? Isn't she beautiful, and doesn't she have gorgeous breasts?"
Darren said, "You know, I can see why somebody came in, good looking blonde, 38 double Ds, Frost thought that was a little strange too, considering he had just lost both of his sons, and I don't believe at that time he knew for a fact if Darlie was going to live or not.
In the kitchen, police noticed a set of white-handled knives. One space was empty. It appeared the murder weapon, a 10-inch white-handled knife, came from the routier's own kitchen. The blood drops on the floor were photographed and collected for DNA testing. The size and shape of the blood droplets would be analyzed to see if they were consistent with Darlie's version of events.
Darlie's nightshirt was another important piece of blood evidence. Forensic scientists hoped that it, too, would provide information about the murders.
DNA testing of the bloody sock found in the alley revealed the blood was that of the two boys, Devon and Damon. However, police bloodhounds were not able to track the intruder's scent beyond the location of the sock.
Why would an intruder leave a murder weapon behind in a house and yet take a sock down the alley? Why would an intruder leave this sock in open view for the police to find instead of disposing of it in a garbage can or down a storm sewer drain?
Police found some other inconsistencies. Darlie said she chased the intruder through the kitchen and he knocked a wine glass on the floor. But pieces of glass were on top of the blood drops on the floor, and there were no cuts on Darlie's feet. Underneath the overturned vacuum cleaner was more blood spatter and a wheel impression in the blood. It appeared that Darlie ran through the kitchen before the glass broke and the vacuum cleaner overturned. On the handle of the vacuum cleaner was a blood stain. DNA test revealed it was Darlie's. The blood dripped onto the handle at an 80-degree angle, as if Darlie were leaning over the vacuum cleaner. The pattern was not consistent with Darlie's running past the vacuum, as she told police. Either Darlie Routier was mistaken about what happened in the kitchen, or she knew more about the murders than she was telling police. Blood spatter expert Tom Bevel was asked to analyze the blood drops found in the Routier home. As co-author of a well-known textbook on blood pattern analysis, it was Bevel's job to interpret the story told by the blood trail. Bevel noticed the blood drops on the kitchen floor were circular in shape, meaning they were deposited by someone standing still or walking very slowly. Darlie said she was stabbed on the sofa and while bleeding ran through the kitchen after her assailant. But running would have produced blood drops more elliptical in shape, usually with a tail indicating the path and direction of the person running. Darlie also told police that the intruder dropped the knife onto the kitchen floor, but Tom Bevel could find no evidence of that.
Numerous people, to include myself, examined that floor to try and find evidence of a knife drop, either even pointed straight down or falling on its handle or falling on its side or whatever. And we were unable to find anything that would be consistent with that. If it had as much blood on it as it was found, which it would have to, then it should have produced an outline of a knife or evidence of the knife dropping onto the floor. And we simply didn't find that.
Barry Dickey is a forensic audio expert assigned to analyze Darlie's telephone call to police. In order to conduct his analysis, Dickey isolated Darlie's voice by eliminating all of the background noise.
Somebody came in while I was sleeping. Me and my little boys were sleeping downstairs. Somebody came in, stabbed my babies, stabbed me. I woke up.
In my opinion, Darlie had moved from at least 3 different rooms in the house. And these rooms were moved in a very rapid fashion, and she did not stay in any one of the ambiances very long.
But if Darlie walked briskly in between rooms, this contradicted her story to police.
When police interviewed Darlie after the murder, she was holding a wet towel to her neck wound. Police wondered if the towel had been used to clean out blood before they arrived. To find out, investigators used luminol, a chemical that glows when sprayed on an area where blood has been removed.
Once we darkened the kitchen down and applied the luminol, we were able to see footprints there in front of the sink, which kind of made the hair on the back of our neck stand up.
The footprints in front of the kitchen sink were Darley's. On the cabinet beneath the sink, there was visible blood, and luminol revealed that more had been cleaned up before police arrived.
The blood evidence in front of the sink indicated to us that someone had stand there in front of the sink for a significant amount of time bleeding and not moving around. There was blood drops on top of blood drops in the floor in front of the sink.
DNA testing revealed the blood belonged to Darley. Prosecutors suspected that it was here where Darley cut her neck and arm.
If there was an intruder and he came in without leaving any evidence of walking through there.
Also on the carpet was an unusual blood impression, the distinct outline of the murder weapon. The heavy line of blood near the tip of the blade told forensic experts something important about the killer.
The only way that I am aware that you could get something coming off of the knife in that manner as we found it would be to have the knife in the hand of a person that is bleeding. In other words, they are contributing blood continuously. So if you had a wound on this arm with the knife in this hand, with the blood flowing down the arm, ultimately across the hand, and then down the blade of the knife, that will produce that very heavy bleeding that we've got in the front of the knife in the impression.
Coincidentally, Darley had a knife wound on her right arm. DNA tests revealed that the blood was that of both Damon and Darley, and not that of an unknown assailant. Darley said she picked up the knife from the kitchen floor and put it on the counter. She said nothing about taking it into the family room.
No bloody trail, no fingerprints, no trace of a suspect. I mean, Peter Pan came down the chimney maybe and committed the murder, but or Tinkerbell or somebody. But we have no evidence of anyone coming through the window, committing the murders and leaving.
Police were now convinced that there was no intruder in the Routier home on the night of the murders. Just 8 days after the murders, the Routiers celebrated what would have been Devon's 7th birthday at the cemetery. Family members invited a local television news crew to attend.
Happy birthday, dear Devon.
If you knew Devon and Damon, you would know that they're up in heaven, and they're up there having the biggest birthday party that we could ever imagine. And they wouldn't want us to be down here being sad, even though our hearts are breaking. I know that Devon and Damon would want us to be happy.
District Attorney Greg Davis watched the celebration on television.
I was just sickened by what I saw, because it had only been a week since these boys' deaths, and yet we've got a full-blown birthday party out there at the gravesite. And it really struck me as more than curious.
At the Dallas County Institute of Forensic Sciences, Charles Lynch discovered the most damaging piece of evidence contradicting Darley's intruder story. On one of the bread knives from the Routier's kitchen, Lynch found a single fiberglass rod and some rubber dust. The cut window screen in the Routier garage was made of polyvinyl chloride bundles. The interior core of that bundle was composed of fiberglass rods. The fiberglass rod found on the kitchen knife was identical to the fiberglass rods from the Routier screen. Lynch could not find any other source of fiberglass inside the Routier home that was similar.
So I was able to eliminate all other sources of fiberglass that I could find as being a source. So the conclusion is that a fiberglass rod found on the bread knife may have come from the window screen, but not to the exclusion of all other sources.
FBI profiler Alan Brantley was convinced there was no intruder.
We have never seen a case where an offender comes from outside the residence, breaks into the home, takes a knife, and then goes back outside the home and cuts the screen to come back in. Those steps, that kind of behavior is just unnecessary to the commission of any kind of an offense, unless you're attempting to make the scene look like something you think it should look like or that you want other people to believe occurred. And again, that's an element of staging.
And on Darley's nightshirt, scientists found cast-off blood spatter on the back right shoulder area. DNA testing revealed that the blood belonged to the two boys.
Some of those blood stains are coming in a direction consistent with the movement of the item that was bloodstained. In my opinion, in this case, the knife. As you're drawing the knife backward, the blood is coming off of the end of the knife as it's being drawn backward, and of course, if it's close enough and it's still in an upward flight, it will point in an upward direction with the blood stains.
The blood spatter was pointed upwards, consistent with the movement of a bloody knife in Darley's right hand. The forensic evidence all told a story quite different from the one Darley told. Speculation is that Darley may have removed her panties to suggest the possibility of a sexual assault. Standing at the kitchen sink, Darley turned the knife on herself, slicing both her neck and right arm. Then something unexpected happened. 5-year-old Damon was still alive, crawling through the family room. He was stabbed 2 more times. The knife impression on the carpet was caused by blood from her arm wound as it dripped over the tip of the knife. The audio analysis of the 911 call reveals that Darley was moving in between rooms quickly as she staged the crime scene and removed some of the blood evidence. But Darley's attempt to mislead investigators failed.
It's hard to explain it, but these kids were in her way. They were in the way of her lifestyle and her ambitions and what she wanted to do. And she simply made a decision that those children would no longer be in her way.
Darley Routier was arrested and charged with the murder of her 2 sons. Darren Routier denied he was involved, and no charges were filed against him. Patricia Springer described the possible motive in her book, Flesh and Blood.
There is no one reason why Darley Routier did this. It is a combination of things. It had nothing to do with money. It had to do with the multiple births, with the total responsibility. We've learned since then that Darren really didn't help a lot with the children. They painted this picture of the perfect family and how great they were, and everything they did was as a family. But the family life was an illusion that they perpetrated on anyone that would listen to it.
Darlie Routier was found guilty of first-degree murder and was sentenced to death. She currently sits on death row, awaiting execution.
Texas is a pretty conservative state, and I want everybody to know that you can't go out and kill our children and expect to live.
I think that Darlie got exactly what she deserved in this case. We probably gave her more justice than she deserved in this case. If you look at the barbaric acts that brought her to that courtroom, we did all that the system allowed us to do to her. But she richly deserves to be on death row, and she richly deserves to be executed one day.
Scott was a ladies' man, and while it wasn't unusual for him to be seeing a number of women at the same time, his date on this night raised more than a few eyebrows.
Hey, everybody. This is my lady friend Shayna. I'm kidding, man.
Sometime during the party, Scott became ill, so sick he was unable to drive home. A few days later, Scott Dunn disappeared and was never seen again. 24-year-old Scott Dunn was a fun-loving young man who enjoyed life to the fullest. Scott lived in Lubbock, Texas, settling there after serving in the U.S. military. He worked for MGM Electronics in a job he loved, installing custom sound systems in automobiles. The last time friends saw Scott was on May 13, 1991, at a party after work. Scott was a prankster and decided to add a little excitement to the festivities. His date that night wasn't a she at all. She was really a he, a transvestite. Before the night was through, Scott's friends eventually found out and weren't amused. Later, while still at the party, Scott became ill. He was so sick he couldn't drive home and stayed overnight on the sofa. The next day, his live-in girlfriend, Leisha Hamilton, drove over to pick him up.
He looked like crap. He couldn't hardly walk. You could tell he'd been in bed all day. He wasn't showered. He wasn't clean. Clothes on all awkwardly. Couldn't get dressed by himself.
After spending another full day in bed, Scott told Leisha he finally felt well enough to return to work.
I woke up that morning. He was in bed with me by then. Asked him how he felt. I asked him did he need a ride to work because he didn't have his cars there. He said no, his friend was coming for him, and just asked me to get him a glass of water and some sinus medicine, which I did, brought it to him, and then I left. When I came home, he was gone.
When Scott's friend stopped by the apartment to pick him up, there was no answer.
No one ever would answer, so just never heard from him.
2 days later, Leisha called Scott's father in Pennsylvania to see if he had heard from Scott.
And it's a young woman's voice, and she goes into, I don't know if I'm talking to who I'm talking to, but I assume you're Scott's father because I found the telephone number on the telephone bill. And I said, well, that's right, I'm Scott's father, but who are you? She said, well, I've been living with Scott for a couple of months now, and sometime we've been together for some time. And I said, well, I don't really know who you are.
Jim Dunn filed a missing persons report with the Lubbock Police Department.
What was he wearing last time you saw him?
Police wondered whether Scott Dunn's personal life held some clues to his disappearance. When Scott Dunn disappeared from Lubbock, Texas without a trace, his friends told police this was out of character.
The way Scott was, he would have called at least and said, hey guys, look, I'm out here in Mexico, hanging out, partying, something.
Scott's live-in girlfriend, Leisha Hamilton, told police that when she returned from work, Scott was gone. She also said that a large piece of carpet was missing from under the sofa. When police searched the bedroom, they discovered that another piece of carpet in the bedroom had also been removed and replaced with the carpet from under the sofa. Along the edge were some rust-colored stains.
The staining along the edge of that patch in the original carpet was very evident to anybody that's been doing this for any length of time. It was blood.
When the carpet patch was lifted, police noticed it was held together with duct tape. On the underpadding was another large stain which also appeared to be blood. In one spot, it had soaked through a hole in the padding to the cement floor underneath. And it looked as if someone had washed blood from the baseboard. To find out, investigators used a chemical called luminol, which can detect areas where blood has been cleaned up with water and detergents. The luminol revealed a scene of horrific violence.
You can actually see the pattern, you can see where blood had been, and my initial reaction was that something had occurred in that apartment.
It was startling. Somebody had very obviously tried to clean the whole thing up and had done a fairly good job of it.
I just knew that he was dead. Felt very confident that he was dead. It was probably the longest day of my life, and it was the most devastating thing that had ever happened to me.
But who would want to kill Scott Dunn, and why? Dunn had a previous arrest and conviction for possession of cocaine, but the theory that this was somehow drug-related was inconsistent with the crime scene.
If it was a drug hit, they probably would have left the person there wanting everybody in the world to see so that nobody else would cross them. And this crime scene was covered up, and the only reason it was covered up was because it was trying to be hidden.
Police also discovered Scott Dunn was leading a secret life. While living with Leisha Hamilton, he continued to date numerous other women.
He was wild. He played the field. He had, in my opinion, he had a history of using women for his own purposes. In fact, he was engaged to be married to a young lady in the Metroplex while he was living with Leisha Hamilton.
Leisha Hamilton learned about Scott's engagement just 1 month earlier.
Who's calling? His fiance? Yeah, I'll be sure to tell him you called.
And I think at the point where that telephone call came is when Leisha realized she'd been had by Scott. And Leisha herself was a user, and when it became apparent to her that she in this situation was not the user but was in fact the usee, she became enraged.
But was that sufficient motive for Leisha Hamilton to murder Scott Dunn? And if so, where was the body? Leisha Hamilton continued to call Jim Dunn from Texas, keeping him informed of the investigation into Scott's disappearance. But she asked for something in return. She wanted Scott's yellow sports car. Jim Dunn taped those telephone conversations.
You seem to want the car, and I have promised you the car when this is all over, but you don't seem to want to wait.
Actually, I don't. I don't need it. It is a want right now, okay? The only thing I want is this car. That's the only thing I've wanted from the start. That's the only thing I want now.
A background check by Lubbock police revealed that Leisha Hamilton had a past arrest in New Mexico for embezzlement. But if Leisha was involved in Scott's disappearance, why had she helped police by pointing out the missing carpet in their apartment? Leisha told Scott's father that she thought a man named Tim Smith had something to do with Scott's disappearance.
Tim Smith was a guy that lived in the apartment near Leisha. He had been brought up in a very strict, very religious environment. My theory was that this was the first real contact he'd ever had with a worldly woman, and that he became enamored with her and the way she made him feel, and he just fell head over heels in love with her.
Police discovered that Smith did not show up for work on the day Scott Dunn disappeared.
Tim Smith. Norwich Police Department.
When police visited Tim Smith's apartment to ask a few questions, they noticed he was packing to move.
We're investigating the disappearance of Scott Dunn. Whatever I can do to help. Mind if we take a look around? Sure, go ahead.
When they walked back into the living room, they noticed that something that had been sitting on the bookshelf disappeared.
Where's the roll of tape? What tape? The duct tape was there on the shelf. I don't know what you're talking about.
But behind some books on another shelf, police found what they were looking for, the duct tape that was on the shelf just a few minutes earlier.
That was a stroke of luck, but it's also good investigative work. I mean, how many times do you walk into a place where a guy's moving and see a roll of duct tape and think nothing of it?
The duct tape was sent to the forensic laboratory . The samples were analyzed using infraspectrophotometry, where infrared light is passed through the duct tape.
And the detector will determine how much wavelength of light is being absorbed at different wavelengths.
The results are then printed out in a chart.
In the case of Roger Scott Dunn, the duct tape
as the carpet in Scott Dunn's bedroom.
I feel confident that the fibers on the side of the duct tape came from the apartment and that the duct tape underneath the carpet came from the roll of duct tape.
But without a body, authorities were hesitant to conclude homicide.
A lot of it had to do with the body. We had no body. And the district attorney's office at that time was very apprehensive to try to take something to trial where you had no corpus delicti, is what they say.
A full year passed, and Jim Dunn decided to take matters into his own hands. He heard about a group of international forensic experts who meet several times a year in Philadelphia to study unsolved murders. The group of 82 members is called the Vidocq Society, named after Eugene Francois Vidocq, an 18th century French detective considered to be the father of modern criminal investigation. One of the co-founders of the Vidocq Society, Richard Walter, agreed to listen to Mr. Dunn's story.
Well, after about an hour and a half of me presenting, showing pictures and listening to some tape recordings and things I had, he looked me straight in the eye and said, Jim, aren't you tired of being the grieving father?
And he looked at me and he said, I thought I was supposed to be. And I said, no, you were supposed to be goddamn mad. Let's go after that bitch.
Richard Walter was convinced that Leisha Hamilton held the key to Scott Dunn's disappearance. Walter sent the crime scene photos to Dr. Richard Shepherd, a forensic pathologist at Scotland Yard in London. After reviewing the information, Dr. Shepherd concluded that Scott Dunn had been murdered in the corner of his bedroom, the result of multiple blunt trauma injuries. But at the time, under Texas law, without a body, there was no homicide. Armed with Dr. Shepherd's forensic analysis, Richard Walter pleaded the case to the district attorney, arguing that they had a body part.
He said, what part of the body is that? I said, blood's connective tissue. He looked, gave me a long look, and he said, all right, you got her, murder.
Prosecutors brought in their own blood spatter expert, Tom Bevel, to confirm the findings of Dr. Shepard. According to Bevel, the blood spatter pattern on the walls indicated 3 distinct lines of cast-off blood from a weapon.
For example, if we had 3 cast-off stains that were going in 3 directions, that would be consistent with 3 blows, plus the one to create the blood in the first place. So in this case, we'd say there was a minimum of 4 blows that was delivered.
To find out how much blood Scott Dunn lost during the assault, Bevel conducted a blood saturation test. By pouring human blood onto a test piece of carpet, Bevel created the same size stain found in the bedroom, in this case 266 square inches. It took just under 2 units of blood to create the stain and soak through to the padding underneath.
If you take that in consideration with all the other physical evidence that's there, such as the blood cleanup, the cutting out of the carpet, the blood spatter, the cast-off that's to the wall and also to the ceiling, along with that blood volume, it certainly is a high suspicion that somebody in fact is dead.
Authorities were now convinced that Scott Dunn had been murdered in his bedroom. Lubbock police suspected that both Leisha Hamilton and Tim Smith were somehow involved in Scott Dunn's murder, but they had no evidence linking Leisha to the crime, and the only link to Smith was the duct tape. Until Richard Walter discovered something that was previously overlooked. Walter learned that several strands of unidentified hair had been found on the duct tape in Scott Dunn's bedroom. He suggested the hair be sent for forensic analysis. At the FBI lab in Washington, D.C., the hair from the duct tape underneath the carpet was compared to hair samples from Leisha Hamilton and Tim Smith.
No Scott Dunn hairs were found on that tape, but both the hairs of Leisha Hamilton and Tim Smith were found on that duct tape holding it in, which means that when that duct tape was put down and that patch put in place, they were there.
5.5 years after Scott Dunn's disappearance, Leisha Hamilton and Tim Smith were arrested and charged with murder. Prosecutors believe that Leisha's motive was revenge, that she was angry when she learned that Scott was engaged to another woman.
She's hard as rocks, bright, aggressive, works, smart, but has this insatiable appetite for power, control, crushing people. She dismisses you, you don't dismiss her.
Leisha Hamilton was the absolute instigator, ringleader, and she was the Wicked Witch of the West who contrived, developed, led, and covered up this whole thing.
Prosecutors believe that Scott Dunn was murdered in the early morning hours of May 16, 1991. He was asleep in the bedroom and struck at least 4 times with a blunt object. About 2 units of Scott's blood was lost in the attack. As Scott's body was removed from the apartment, his blood was transferred onto the bedroom doorknob. The location of the body is still unknown. The cover-up failed because the water and detergents could not remove the hemoglobin components of the blood, which later fluoresced when sprayed with the chemical luminol. A piece of carpet from under the sofa in the living room was used to patch the blood-stained carpet in the bedroom. The duct tape used to patch the carpet together contained strands of hair, consistent with hair samples from both Leisha Hamilton and Tim Smith. And the side of the duct tape picked up some stray carpet fibers. The roll was later found in Tim Smith's apartment. Leisha Hamilton and Tim Smith were tried separately, and both were convicted of murder. Leisha Hamilton was sentenced to 20 years. Tim Smith received a 10-year probation.
The jury, I think, believed that perhaps he had a great deal to do with disposing of the body, but they didn't believe he was actually there when the murder took place. And I think for that reason, they recommended the judge impose probation instead of sentencing him to a term in the penitentiary, which would be carried out.
Although the body of Scott Dunn has never been found, a headstone waits, and the father still mourns.
I'm just hopeful that at some point somebody will talk and that we can recover his remains and still we can have a decent burial and a decent ceremony that we can put him to rest. And I'd feel totally absolved at that point that I'd done everything that I could do if I can ever reach that point. Haven't quite reached that yet, and I still crosses my mind what else I can do, but at this point I'm going to let it go and hope that somebody, the good Lord or somebody, will give us some direction. I don't know what that actually means in my life at some point.
It begins with a sound no one hears anymore, the low mechanical click of a rotary phone being set back into its cradle, a sound swallowed by a Montana winter night in 1977. A night so cold the stars feel sharp enough to cut, a night when silence isn't empty but loaded, stretched tight like a wire about to snap. Because somewhere between the last streetlight and the open dark of the plains, something irreversible has just happened, and the town doesn't know it yet, not officially, not in words. But the air knows, the ground knows, and the quiet knows, and by morning that quiet will harden into a question that will last for decades. The town is small, the kind of place where headlights are events and strangers are noted without effort, where every pickup truck has a history, and every face belongs to someone's cousin or brother or old high school rival, where the land rolls wide and patient and give the illusion that nothing bad can hide for long. And yet on this night, something does, slipping neatly between the gaps of routine, using familiarity as cover, moving unseen because no one is looking for it yet, because no one ever thinks the worst is already underway. The first ripple comes with dawn, pale and thin, spreading through kitchens that smell like coffee and with smoke, through radios murmuring farm reports and weather warnings, through boots stepping onto porches where frost coats the railings like sugar. And then the phone rings again, not rotary now, but urgent, a call that changes the pitch of the morning, a call that sends a man back inside to grab his coat without finishing his drink, a call that makes a woman press her hand to her mouth before she even knows why, because some instincts don't wait for details. By mid-morning, there are cars pulled over where they shouldn't be, doors left open, a cluster of bodies standing too still at the edge of something no one wants to name out loud, and the word accident floats briefly before sinking under the weight of what's actually there, the wrongness of it, the way the scene refuses to explain itself, the way answers seem to recoil the moment anyone reaches for them, and already the phrases begin to form, whispered first, then spoken, then written down. Suspicious circumstances, unexplained injuries, ongoing investigation. The victim becomes a noun before they become a story. Reduced identifiers, age, address, last known movements, a checklist that pretends order can be imposed quickly if the right boxes are ticked. But beneath that structure there's a current of disbelief, because this isn't supposed to happen here. Not like this. Not to someone everyone recognizes. Not in a place that prides itself on knowing its own shadows. And as the sheriff's car idles nearby, exhaust curling into the cold air, realization begins to take shape, slow and heavy, that this won't be wrapped up by sunset, that this is the kind of thing that lingers. Questions pile up fast, faster than answers ever will. Where were they going? Who saw them last? Why didn't anyone hear anything? And each question carries a second, quieter one beneath it, the one nobody voices yet, the one that makes eyes slide sideways and conversations drop to half volume. Could have been someone from here, someone we know, someone who waved yesterday and will wave again tomorrow. Because the scariest thing about a crime like this isn't the violence itself. It's the intimacy, the way it forces a community to look inward and realize the danger may already be woven into its daily life. Investigators move through the scene with careful steps, measuring, photographing, bagging pieces of a puzzle they don't yet understand, aware that every choice they make now will echo far into the future, that every missed detail will someday become a regret. But the tools are limited, the science blunt by modern standards, and much depends on memory, on statements taken in kitchens and living rooms where the television hums in the background, and people strain to remember ordinary moments that suddenly feel charged with meaning. What time was it exactly? What were they wearing? Did anything seem off? And memory, unreliable on its best days, begins to bend under the pressure. The town watches all of this with a mix of fascination and fear, drawn to the spectacle even as it unsettles them, scanning the faces of deputies and state investigators for hints, for reassurance, for any sign that this is a clear shape and a clear ending. But what they see instead is caution, the careful language of people who know they don't yet control the narrative, who know that saying too much can be as dangerous as saying nothing at all, and so information trickles out in fragments, just enough to feed the rumor mill, not enough to satisfy it. By the end of the first week, theories have taken root like weeds, some whispered over fences, others broadcast confidently at the local bar, motives invented, timelines rearranged, reputations quietly damaged because in the absence of facts, speculation rushes in to fill the void, and every strange neighbor, every past argument, every old grievance is reevaluated through the lens of what if that meant more than we thought. What if we missed something obvious and suspicion becomes a low-grade fever the whole town runs without quite admitting it? The investigation stretches on, days turning into weeks, the initial urgency fading into something more procedural, more grinding. Files growing thicker even as clarity remains elusive, leads chase down roads that end in nothing but open fields and apologies, alibis that check out just well enough to stall progress, evidence that hints but doesn't speak, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the case begins to cool, not officially, not yet, but in the subtle ways that matter, the way briefings get shorter, the way new tips slow to a trickle, the way the crime scene take comes down, and life is expected to resume. But life doesn't resume cleanly. It never does after something like this, because every routine now carries a shadow, every locked door a reminder, every passing year a mark against the promise that justice will come quickly, and the victim's name, once spoken constantly, starts to fade from daily conversation, not out of malice but out of exhaustion, because holding grief at the front of your mind forever is impossible, and so it's set gently to the side, to be remembered on anniversaries, in quieter moments, in the way some places are avoided without anyone quite agreeing to avoid them. As the calendar flips and the 70s give way to the 80s, the case acquires a new label, one that sounds clinical but feels like a verdict, cold case, a phrase that suggests preservation but also distance, a sense that whatever heat once drove the search has dissipated into the Montana air, and the files are boxed up, stored, waiting for a future that may or may not arrive, waiting for something that wasn't available then, a technology, a confession, a mistake, anything capable of breaking the long stalemate. Decades pass the way they always do, unevenly, quietly, with the town changing just enough to be noticeable but not enough to feel unfamiliar, new families moving in, old ones moving away, buildings repurposed, faces aging, and the story of 1977 settling into the background noise of local history, mentioned in hushed tones and newcomers, referenced obliquely when talking about why things are the way they are, a cautionary tale without a conclusion, a wound that scarred over but never quite healed for the people closest to it. Time behaves differently, each year not a step away but a reminder of what hasn't been resolved, birthdays that feel wrong, holidays with an empty chair, the constant, quiet calculation of how old they will be now. And somewhere in that long stretch of silence, a belief takes hold that this is how it will always be, that whatever truth exists is buried too deep to be reached, that the night of 1977 will remain frozen, unsolved, a permanent question mark in the town's collective memory. And yet, beneath that resignation, beneath the dust on those old boxes, something waits, something overlooked, dismissed, or simply impossible to read at the time, a fragment that doesn't decay with age, a detail patient enough to survive decades of neglect. Because while people move on and memories blur, evidence does not forget, it only waits. And in Montana, under the wide sky that has seen everything and kept its secrets, the silence that began that night is not as complete as it seems, already threaded with the faintest suggestion that one day, without warning, it will break. Silence doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in through cracks, through unanswered calls and empty desks, through the way the investigation board stops changing and the photos begin to curl at the corners. And in this case, the silence grows heavy enough to feel physical, pressing down on people tasked with breaking it, because every path they follow circles back on itself. Every promising detail dissolves under scrutiny, and the sense of momentum that once pushed them forward thins into frustration, then into doubt, then into something close to resignation. Inside the sheriff's office, the air smells of paper and old coffee, and the case file grows thicker without growing clearer, witness statements stacked in uneven piles, timelines scribbled and rescribbled, maps marked with pins that look decisive until you stare at them long enough to realize they don't point anywhere specific. And every so often someone flips back to the first report, rereads it slowly, hoping the words will rearrange themselves into something new, hoping a sentence, overlooked in the chaos of those early days, will suddenly flare with meaning. The problem is not a lack of information. It's an excess of it, too many small, conflicting details that refuse to align. A neighbor who remembers a car that no one else saw, a passerby convinced they heard something in an hour that doesn't quite fit, a timeline that stretches and contracts depending on who's telling it. And each inconsistency chips away at confidence. Because in a case like this, certainty is everything, and certainty is exactly what remains out of reach. Suspicion shifts subtly over time, never settling long enough to solidify into an arrest, brushing against names and then sliding away, leaving behind only discomfort and quiet resentment. Friendships strained by implication. Glances held a second too long. Doors closed a little faster than before. And while no one says it outright, the town begins to fracture along invisible lines, divided not by proof but by belief, by who thinks what is possible and who refuses to entertain the idea that evil could wear such a familiar face. As weeks turn into months, the investigators feel the pressure from both sides, from a community demanding answers and from a system that measures success in clear outcomes, not an effort expended, and resources start to thin, priorities shift, newer cases clamor for attention, each with their own urgency, their own victims, their own families waiting for closure, and gradually, almost imperceptibly, this one is pushed to the edge of the desk. Still open, still active on paper, but no longer, consuming every waking hour. The victims' routines are reconstructed again and again, a careful replay of the last normal day, what time they left, where they stopped, who they might have spoken to, an ordinary sequence rendered extraordinary by its finality, and yet nothing in that routine screams danger, nothing suggests a clear point where the world tilted and violence stepped in, which only deepens a mystery, because crimes like this are supposed to announce themselves with warning signs, with arguments, threats, visible cracks. But here there's only normalcy abruptly interrupted. Technology offers little comfort. Forensic methods limited. Samples collected and preserved as best they can be. But with a quiet understanding that some questions simply cannot be answered yet, that science has not caught up to hope, and so evidence is cataloged carefully and then set aside, labeled for a future that no one can quite picture, a future where answers might be coaxed from materials that are mute for now. Outside the office, life continues in its stubborn, indifferent way, seasons cycling through harsh winters and brief, blazing summers, the landscape changing colors while the case remains the same, and over time the initial shock dulls, replaced by a kind of weary familiarity, the knowledge that this happened and remains unresolved becoming just another fact of existence, heavy but no longer paralyzing, something people carry with them without always acknowledging the weight. Yet beneath that surface adaptation, the tension never fully releases. It hums quietly, surfacing in moments of collective unease. When another siren wails late at night, when an unfamiliar car idles too long on a side street, when someone doesn't come home on time. And in those moments, the memory of 1977 snaps back into focus, sharp and immediate, a reminder that the unknown is closer than anyone wants to admit. For the family, time stretches cruelly, each update from investigators simultaneously offering hope and reopening wounds, each assurance that the case is still active sounding thinner as the years pass, and they learn to read between the lines, to hear what isn't being said, to recognize the difference between optimism and obligation. And still they wait, because waiting is the only option left, because letting go feels too much like betrayal. The case slips into a strange limbo, neither alive nor dead, referenced occasionally in meetings, revisited during slow periods, always with the same conclusion. Nothing new, nothing solid enough to move forward. And yet it never fully disappears, because something about it resists closure, a sense that it doesn't fit the patterns, that it's missing a piece so fundamental that without it the whole picture remains distorted. Years later, when new faces take over desks and old ones retire, the story is passed down in fragments, warnings wrapped in anecdotes, a reminder of how quickly certainty can unravel, how a single night can ripple outward for generations, and the file remains, its edges worn, its contents yellowing, waiting for the moment when someone looks at it with fresh eyes and sees what others could not. That moment does not announce itself with fanfare. It doesn't arrive as a dramatic revelation. It begins quietly, almost accidentally, with a routine review, a decision made not out of inspiration but out of policy, an audit of old cases driven by new funding, new technology, a renewed interest in unsolved crimes that still haunt the public imagination, and among the stacks pulled from storage, this one surfaces again, heavier than it looks, carrying decades of unanswered questions. As the box is opened, dust rising in a soft cloud, there's a pause, a brief hesitation, because everyone in the room understands what this represents, not just an investigation, but commitment, a reopening of old wounds, a promise that this time, maybe, something will be different. And as the contents are spread across the table, reports and photos and evidence bags laid out under bright lights, the silence that has surrounded the case for so long feels suddenly fragile, as if it's waiting, as if it knows its hold is about to be tested. Fresh eyes do not guarantee fresh answers, but they change the way a room breathes. And as the documents are rearranged under new hands, the past feels closer, less settled. The events of 1977 no longer distant history, but a living sequence waiting to be disturbed. And investigators feel it almost immediately, that subtle shift when a case stops being archival and starts being active again, when questions that were once rhetorical become urgent, pointed, demanding response. The first step is repetition, slow and deliberate. Every statement reread without assumptions, every photograph examined without the shortcuts of familiarity. And what emerges is not a single revelation, but a pattern of small discomforts, moments where the narrative doesn't quite hold together, details previously dismissed as noise now sounding like static that might conceal a signal, and the realization settles in that the case may not have been cold because it lacked clues, but because it was. Smothered by context, by the limitations and expectations of its time. Witness accounts are charted again, not just for what they say, but for how they say it. Pauses noted, contradictions mapped, the evolution of memory traced across decades, and one statement in particular begins to glow faintly under scrutiny, not because it is dramatic or detailed, but because it has remained stubbornly consistent, unchanged across years of retelling, a quiet observation that never fit the dominant theory, and was therefore quietly sidelined. The environment itself is reconsidered, not as a static backdrop, but as an active participant. The terrain, the weather, the rhythms of daily life in Montana town where isolation is both protection and threat, where distances are measured not just in miles, but in minutes of vulnerability, and when those factors are layered back into the timeline, certain assumptions begin to crumble, routes thought impossible suddenly plausible, windows of opportunity, expanding where they were once thought. Narrow, technology, long promised and long delayed, finally steps into the room with confidence. Forensic methods refined enough to coax stories from fragments, to ask questions of evidence that has been waiting patiently for decades. And as samples are logged and prepared, there is a collective awareness that this is a one-shot moment, that expectations must be tempered, that disappointment is still the most likely outcome. But hope has a way of slipping in any way, uninvited and impossible to ignore. While the lab work moves at its own pace, the human side of the investigation accelerates. Old addresses tracked down, names pulled from yellowed pages and cross-referenced with modern databases, and the search expands outward, not just for suspects, but for context, for understanding how lives have unfolded since that year, how people have changed, what they've carried with them, what they might have buried. Some doors open easily, greeted by curiosity or relief. People eager to finally talk, to unburden themselves of memories they rehearse in silence for years, while others remain firmly closed, refusals polite but firm, voices tight, the past something they'd rather not exhume, and each reaction is logged not as guilt or innocence, but as data, another variable in a complex equation. The community reacts with a mix of fascination and unease as word spreads, the old case resurfacing in conversations and headlines, stirring emotions that never fully faded. And for those who lived through it, the revival feels like a time warp, the same questions echoing with new urgency, while for younger residents, it's a revelation, a reminder that the quiet streets they know have shadows stretching far back into history. As the investigators dig deeper, a narrative begins to form that diverges subtly from the original, not contradicting it outright, but reframing it, shifting emphasis from the obvious to the overlooked. And this new perspective brings with it a different kind of tension, the unsettling sense that the truth may have been close all along, obscured not by malice but by momentum, by the rush to make sense of chaos with the tools available at the time. Then the lab results arrive quietly, without ceremony, numbers and codes that require careful interpretation, and as they are translated into meaning, the room stills, because what they suggest is not a definitive answer but a direction, a narrowing of possibilities that had once seemed infinite, and suddenly the case feels smaller, more contained, its edges sharper. This direction points back towards something old, something familiar, an element present from the beginning but never fully interrogated, and as files are pulled and notes compared, the weight of that oversight becomes apparent, a collective reckoning with the idea that the solution may have been delayed not by absence but by proximity, by the discomfort looking too closely at what was already there. Interviews are scheduled with renewed urgency, conversations framed differently, questions sharpened, and in these exchanges, subtle cracks appear, not dramatic confessions but inconsistencies, shifts in tone, answers that circle rather than land, and each one adds pressure, tightening the narrative, compressing decades of silence into a present moment that feels increasingly volatile. At night, the investigators carry the case home with them, replaying conversations, imagining scenarios, aware that they're standing on the edge of something consequential, and yet cautious, because experience has taught them how easily hope can overreach, how devastating it can be to mistake coincidence for causation. Still, the momentum is undeniable, the sense that the long-standing stalemate has been broken, that the silence surrounding the case is thinning, becoming porous, and as the pieces begin to align, not perfectly but convincingly, the realization dawns that the truth, whatever it is, will not simply close a file, it will reverberate outward, reshaping memories, altering reputations, forcing a community to confront a version of its past it may not be ready to accept. And in that tension between revelation and resistance, the case accelerates toward a point of no return, where answers once uncovered cannot be put back, and the decades of quiet that followed 1977 begin to feel less like an ending and more like a long-held breath, finally released. The pressure doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in, quiet and relentless, as if the case itself has learned how to breathe again, expanding into every available space. And with each passing day, the investigators feel the past leaning forward, insisting on attention, refusing once more to stay buried beneath dust and procedure. The renewed interviews begin without spectacle, no flashing lights or dramatic confrontations. Just measured questions delivered with precision sharpened by hindsight, and the people on the other side of the table sense immediately that this is not the same conversation they remember from years ago. Voices that once spoke freely now hesitate, answers padded with qualifiers, memory suddenly less certain, and the contrast is striking because memory, when truthful, tends to erode gently, not fracture under pressure, and this fracture is noted, logged, compared against earlier statements that were once confident and clean. The investigators don't interrupt, don't accuse, they let the silence do the work, let the weight of the moment settle, until words spill out unevenly, revealing more in their rhythm than their content. Outside the interview rooms, the case takes on a second life in the town itself, where old rumors resurface, reshaped by time but recognizable in their core, whispered in diners and hardware stores, passed along with a mix of caution and curiosity. Some residents bristle at the attention, weary of being defined by an old wound, while others lean into it, eager for resolution, convinced that the truth, whatever it is, will finally lift a long-standing fog. The investigators sift through these community narratives carefully, aware that rumor can both illuminate and distort, but patterns emerge nonetheless, recurring names, repeated locations, moments that multiple people remember differently but never forget, and these intersections become points of focus, places where personal memory and public history collide. Each collision sends out ripples, And those ripples disturb the carefully settled sediment of the original investigation. A particular timeline begins to tighten, its margins shrinking as assumptions are stripped away, and in its new form it tells a different story, one less dramatic but more plausible, grounded not in coincidence but in opportunity. The recalibrated sequence reveals gaps that were once filled with speculation now left open, and into those gaps flow new possibilities, scenarios that feel uncomfortable precisely because they make sense. Attention turns to movements rather than motives, to who was where and when, to routines interrupted or altered without explanation, and the mundane details of daily life become crucial, the kind that rarely make headlines but often hide the truth. A missed appointment, an unexpected detour, a phone call placed and never acknowledged. Each detail is small, but together they form a lattice, and within that lattice something begins to take shape. The forensic work, slow and methodical, continues in parallel, offering not answers but reinforcement, corroborating some paths while quietly closing others, and this dual momentum, human and scientific, creates a rhythm that carries the investigation forward. The team becomes acutely aware of time, not the decades already past, but the narrowing window ahead, the sense that once this phase ends, there may be no second chance. One evening, as files are spread across the table, a connection surfaces that feels almost too simple to be significant, a link between two pieces of information that had always been stored separately, never compared side by side. When they are aligned, the implication is immediate and unsettling because it suggests intent where none have been officially recognized, a deliberate choice hidden beneath layers of normalcy. This realization doesn't prompt celebration or certainty. It brings caution, a tightening of posture, the kind of silence that follows a sudden shift in gravity. The investigators know better than to rush, know that history is littered with cases derailed by premature conclusions, and yet the gravity remains, pulling focus toward a specific axis around which the rest of the evidence begins to rotate. Interviews resume with a sharper edge, still calm, still controlled, but guided by a clearer objective, and the responses now feel less like recollections and more like defenses, carefully constructed, selectively detailed. The investigators note how often answers return to rehearsed phrasing, how certain topics are skirted with practiced ease, and how the emotional register shifts when specific names or places are mentioned. Sleep becomes elusive. The case intrudes in fragments, half-remembered statements replaying in the mind, maps and timelines overlaying dreams. And the investigators carry this mental weight with them, aware that obsession is both asset and liability. They remind themselves to step back, to let the evidence lead, even as instinct whispers insistently in the background. Meanwhile, the families affected by the case watch from a distance, hope and apprehension tangled together, every update a potential turning point, every delay a fresh wound. They have learned patience the hard way, through years of unanswered questions, and now, as the machinery of justice begins to hum again, they brace themselves for impact, unsure whether the outcome will bring closure or simply a new form of pain. The town, too, seems to hold its breath. Old landmarks take on new meaning. Familiar roads suddenly charge with history, and the landscape itself feels complicit, its wide-open spaces offering both solace and concealment. The investigators spend time there, not just reviewing maps, but standing in those spaces, feeling the distances, the sight lines, the isolation, understanding viscerally what paper diagrams can only suggest. As the picture clarifies, resistance increases. Legal barriers appear, procedural questions raised, reminders of statute and scope inserted into conversations, and it becomes clear that the case is no longer just about truth, but about consequence, about what happens when truth disrupts established narratives and implicates people who have lived for decades under the assumption of anonymity. The team navigates these obstacles carefully, aware that missteps now could unravel months of progress, and they move with deliberate precision, documenting everything, anticipating challenges, building a framework strong enough to support what they suspect is coming. This is no longer an exercise in historical curiosity. It is an active pursuit with real stakes. Then comes a moment, small and easily overlooked by anyone not immersed in the case, a subtle shift in tone during an interview, a pause that stretches a fraction too long, an answer that arrives a beat too late. It is not proof, not even a confession, but it is a signal, and the investigators exchange glances that acknowledge it without comment, understanding that something fundamental has just changed. From that point on, the case seems to accelerate of its own accord, as if freed from inertia, and the remaining pieces fall faster, not because they're being forced, but because they were always aligned, waiting for the right angle of approach. The silence that once defined the case is now fractured, punctuated by revelations both large and small, and the narrative that emerges is neither clean nor comforting. As the investigators prepare for the next phase, they are keenly aware of the weight of what they carry, not just the responsibility to solve a case, but the obligation to handle its truth with care, knowing that resolution does not erase loss, and that answers, once delivered, cannot undo the years spent without them. The case, long dormant, now pulses with urgency, and in that pulse is a warning as much as a promise that the past, no matter how deeply buried, retains its power, and when it finally surfaces, it does so not gently, but with a force shaped by every year it was denied, every question left unanswered, every silence mistaken for peace. Momentum changes the atmosphere, subtle at first, then unmistakable, as if the case itself has shifted from whisper to insistence, and everyone involved can feel it pressing forward, demanding resolution. The investigators don't announce progress. They let it remain unspoken, a current running beneath every action, guiding decisions, sharpening focus. This is the stage where mistakes are most tempting, where confidence and masquerade as certainty, and so they slow down deliberately, rechecking steps, retracing logic, testing assumptions against the cold resistance of fact. Files once considered peripheral are pulled back into the light, their edges worn, their contents reread with new eyes, and patterns that once seemed incidental now carry weight. A receipt logged but never explained. A vehicle sighting dismissed as unreliable. A timeline entry marked approximate instead of exact. These fragments, overlooked in the urgency of the original investigation, now take on renewed significance, not because they are dramatic, but because they are consistent, stubbornly so, aligning with the emerging narrative in ways that feel less like coincidence and more like design. Technology becomes both ally and mirror. Old recordings are digitized, audio enhanced, background noise stripped away until voices sound closer, more intimate, and the emotional undercurrents of past interviews become easier to detect. Hesitation surface. Nervous laughter lingers too long. Emphasis falls where it shouldn't. The investigators listen not just for what is said, but for what is avoided, for the micro pauses that betray internal calculation. At the same time, the paper trail deepens. Financial records, once inaccessible or incomplete, are revisited through modern databases, revealing transactions that raised no alarms decades ago, but now stand out in stark relief. Modest amounts moved at precise intervals. A purchase that contradicts a claim location. An account closed without explanation shortly after the incident. None of it screams guilt, but together it hums with implication, a low-frequency signal that refuses to fade. The community reacts in waves. Some residents feel vindicated, convinced that long-held suspicions are finally being taken seriously. Others retreat, doors closing more firmly. Conversations ending abruptly when unfamiliar cars slow on familiar streets. The case has become a presence again, unsettling routines, stirring memories people had worked hard to bury. Old friendships strain under the weight of implication. Because in a town this size, no one is truly distant from the truth. Investigators move carefully through this emotional terrain, aware that cooperation can evaporate if pressure is applied too openly. They rely on patience, on repeated contact, on the quiet reassurance that they are not there to accuse, but to understand. Even so, resistance sharpens. Statements grow shorter. Calls go unanswered. A lawyer appears where none had been before, a development noted without comment, but not without consequence. Behind closed doors, the team debates strategy, weighing the strength of what they have against the risk of revealing too much too soon. There is an unspoken understanding that once certain steps are taken, there is no retreat, no opportunity to recalibrate without scrutiny. Every move must be justified, every action defensible not just in theory but in court, under lights far harsher than those of an interview room. The case file grows heavier, physically and metaphorically, as new documents are added. Annotations layered atop annotations. The margins fill with questions that now point in a single direction. The investigators feel it, the narrowing of possibility, the way alternative explanations fall away one by one, leaving a core that is difficult to ignore. This is the moment where belief hardens into conviction, though no one says it aloud. Late nights become routine. Offices stay lit long after the rest of the building has gone dark. Coffee cups accumulating like markers of endurance. Fatigue setting in but never fully dulling the edge of urgency. The investigators talk through scenarios repeatedly, stress testing the narrative, searching for weak points, for contradictions that could collapse the entire structure. Each time, the story holds, not perfectly but resiliently. Outside, the seasons change, unnoticed at first, then obvious, the landscape shifting in ways that echo the investigation itself. What was once frozen becomes fluid. What was hidden beneath snow reemerges, altered but recognizable. The passage of time, so often an enemy in cold cases, now feels like a reluctant ally, revealing what haste once obscured. Contact with the families intensifies. They are given careful updates, measured and incomplete by necessity, and they listen with a mix of hope and dread, understanding that progress does not guarantee justice, only the possibility of it. Their reactions are subdued, tempered by years of disappointment. But beneath the restraint there is a tremor, a fragile anticipation that this time might be different. A breakthrough arrives quietly, without ceremony, the result of persistence rather than luck. A detailed cross-reference against a newly available database produces a match that had never been possible before, a confirmation that does not solve the case, but tightens its frame decisively. The investigators sit with the information for a long moment, absorbing its implications, aware that this single piece alters the balance, shifting the burden from possibility to probability. From that point forward, the investigation enters a new phase, one defined less by exploration and more by preparation. Conversations with prosecutors begin, cautious and thorough, every claim backed by documentation, every inference grounded in evidence. The language changes, becoming more precise, less speculative, and with that change comes a new weight. The understanding that lives will be irrevocably affected by what happens next. The silence surrounding the case, once vast and impenetrable, now feels brittle, like glass under pressure, and everyone senses that it will not hold much longer. The investigators move steadily, aware that the final steps are often the most dangerous, where miscalculations can undo years of work, but also where truth, if handled carefully, can finally emerge into the open. As the groundwork is laid for what comes next, there is a collective awareness, shared but unspoken, that the case is approaching a point of no return, and that when it crosses that threshold, the decades of waiting, of wondering, of unanswered questions will give way to something else entirely. Not closure, perhaps, but confrontation, a reckoning shaped by time, evidence, and the quiet determination of those who refuse to let the past remain silent. Pressure doesn't announce itself with noise. It settles in slowly, tightening around the edges of every decision, and by the time anyone acknowledges it, it's already shaping the outcome. The investigation now moves under that pressure, deliberate, controlled, every step measured against the consequences that loom just ahead. This is the phase where truth stops being abstract and starts becoming actionable, where names are no longer placeholders and theories begin to demand accountability. Interviews resume with a different tone. The questions are the same on the surface, familiar enough to disarm, but the cadence has changed, sharper, more precise, leaving less room to drift. Investigators listen with an intensity that borders on surgical, tracking inconsistencies not as isolated slips, but as part of a pattern forming beneath the conversation. When silence stretches, they let it stretch, knowing that discomfort often reveals more than confrontation ever could. Some witnesses sense the shift immediately. They answer cautiously, eyes darting, hands fidgeting, aware that the ground beneath them is no longer stable. Others speak more freely, almost relieved, as if the renewed attention has granted them permission to release something long carried alone. Memories once blurred by time resurface with startling clarity, anchored by the knowledge that what they say now might finally matter. Evidence undergoes another round of scrutiny, this time with prosecutorial standards in mind. Every item is evaluated not just for relevance, but for resilience, its ability to withstand challenge, to remain credible under cross-examination. Weak links are identified and either reinforced with corroboration or set aside entirely, no matter how tempting they might be. The goal is no longer to explore every possibility, but but to present a narrative that is both compelling and unassailable. Behind the scenes, timelines are rebuilt down to the minute. Movements are charted, distances measured, environmental conditions reconstructed from archived data. What was once approximated is now calculated. And in that precision, the story tightens further. Opportunities narrow. Alibis that once seemed plausible begin to fray when exposed to this level of detail, revealing gaps too specific to ignore. The emotional toll becomes evident within the team. Conversations grow quieter, more focused, the weight of responsibility pressing in as they recognize how close they had altered the course of lives that have remained unchanged for decades. There is no celebration in this proximity to resolution, only a sober awareness that the truth, once revealed, cannot be contained or undone. Outside the investigation rooms, the ripple effect intensifies. Rumors circulate faster, fueled by speculation and the unmistakable presence of law enforcement where there have been none for years. Old stories resurface in local bars, whisper recollections traded like currency, each version slightly different, each carrying fragments of something real. The community watches, waiting, caught between hope and fear, uncertain whether the outcome will heal old wounds or tear them open anew. A critical interview takes place under controlled conditions, its importance understood by everyone involved, even if its purpose remains officially undefined. The atmosphere is restrained, almost clinical, but beneath that restraint lies tension thick enough to feel. Questions probe gently at first, then more directly, circling key moments, revisiting choices made long ago. The responses come measured, practiced, but cracks begin to show, subtle shifts in tone, an answer that arrives a beat too late. Investigators note everything. They don't interrupt. They don't accuse. They allow the subject to speak, to fill the space with explanations that, taken individually, sound reasonable, but when placed alongside documented evidence, begin to contradict themselves. This is not about catching someone in a lie in the moment. It's about letting the accumulation of discrepancies speak for itself. Legal consultations intensify. Drafts of affidavits are written and rewritten, language refined to eliminate ambiguity. Each sentence is weighed for accuracy and implication, knowing that precision now is the difference between progress and collapse later. The law demands clarity, and so the narrative is sharpened until it reflects not just what investigators believe, but what they can prove. There's a moment, quiet and unremarkable on the surface, when the team collectively realizes that the investigation has crossed its invisible boundary. From here on, there is no further gathering, only action. The evidence is sufficient. The story is coherent. The remaining questions are not about what happened, but about how the truth will be received when it is finally presented. Sleep becomes irregular. Thoughts replay conversations, documents, timelines, searching for overlooked flaws. Doubt creeps in at the edges, not because the case is weak, but because the stakes are high. This is a final safeguard, the last internal test before irreversible steps are taken. When doubt fails to find a foothold, it gives way to resolve. Families are informed that developments are imminent, though details remain guarded. Their reactions are a study in restraint, emotions held in check by years of tempered expectation. Yet in their voices there is a shift, a cautious recognition that this time feels different, heavier, more grounded in substance than in promise. As preparations conclude, the investigation exists in a suspended state, balanced between past and future. The decades-long silence that once defined the case now feels fragile, stretched thin by the weight of accumulated truth. Everyone involved understands that once it breaks, the sound will carry far beyond the confines of files and interview rooms, echoing through a community that has waited a lifetime to hear it. And so the final pieces are set in place, not with dramatic flair, but with quiet determination, the kind born from endurance rather than urgency, signaling that the moment long deferred is now inevitable, and that the next step will transform years of unanswered questions into a confrontation with reality itself. The moment action replaces preparation, the air changes. It becomes thinner, harder to breathe, as if the past itself senses what's coming and resists being disturbed. This is where decades of silence begin to crack, not with sudden explosion, but with control, deliberate pressure applied exactly where it hurts most. Warrants are drafted, signed, folded into jackets with the quiet gravity of something that will alter lives before the day is over. The first knock is procedural, calm, polite, but it lands like thunder. Doors that remain closed in this case for nearly half a century finally open, revealing interiors frozen in time, spaces where the years have piled up in layers of dust and routine. Investigators move carefully, methodically, every step documented, every item treated, as if it might be the one piece that ties everything together. Nothing is assumed insignificant anymore. Boxes are opened, drawers emptied, old photographs surface, their edges curled, faces staring back from another era, unaware how close the present has come. Handwritten notes appear, mundane on the surface, but scrutinized for context, timing, intention. Even absence is noted, the missing items speaking as loudly as those that remain. This is archaeology with consequences, the excavation of a life intersecting with a crime. Simultaneously, interviews escalate. The tone shifts from conversational to formal, rights read aloud, recording devices placed in plain view. Words now carry weight. Pauses become strategic. The people across the table sense it immediately, the subtle but unmistakable signal that this is no longer a historical inquiry, but an active reckoning. Some respond with defensiveness, others with rehearsed calm. But the veneer is thinner now, easier to see through. One subject falters, not dramatically, not enough to draw attention on its own, but enough when layered against everything else. A timeline slips, a detail changes. It's corrected quickly, too quickly, as if preemptively anticipating a challenge that hasn't yet been voiced. Investigators exchange glances, say nothing, let the moment pass, knowing they've just marked a turning point. The legal machinery grinds forward, slow but unstoppable. Prosecutors are briefed in secure rooms, presented not with speculation, but with a story that unfolds cleanly from start to finish. They ask hard questions, probe for weaknesses, challenge assumptions. Investigators welcome it. The scrutiny is necessary. This is how the truth is fortified against collapse. Outside, the community senses movement, even without official confirmation. Patrol cars linger longer. Unfamiliar faces appear at familiar addresses. The unspoken question hangs in the air, shared in glances at grocery stores and gas stations. People begin to remember what they once tried to forget, replaying conversations, re-examining impressions formed decades ago, wondering if they missed something obvious. For those closest to the case, the emotional strain intensifies. There is no room now for nostalgia or theoretical debate. Every decision has immediate consequences. The weight of responsibility presses in, sharpened by the knowledge that mistakes at this stage could undo years of work or, worse, deliver a false sense of closure. A key development arrives quietly, delivered not with fanfare, but with paperwork. A result, a confirmation. It aligns with the theory so precisely that denial becomes impossible. The room absorbs the information in silence, each person aware that this is the hinge upon which everything turns. From this point on, there is no ambiguity about direction. Confrontations become unavoidable. When they happen, they are controlled, respectful, but relentless. Questions return to moments long past, now illuminated by evidence that strips away plausible deniability. The past is no longer distant. It is present, immediate, demanding answers that can no longer hide behind the erosion of time. One conversation ends differently than expected, not with confession, but with resignation. Shoulders slump, defenses soften. The realization sets in that the story held for decades can no longer withstand the pressure of truth. It's not over yet, but the end is visible now, no longer obscured by uncertainty. As night falls, the investigation does not rest. Files are updated, calls made, plans adjusted. The machinery continues to turn, fueled by momentum that has been building for years. Everyone involved understands that the next steps will not only close a case, but redefine how it is remembered. And in that quiet, relentless forward motion, the silence that once protected the truth finally begins to fail, giving way to a reckoning that has waited patiently since 1977, ready now to be heard whether the world is prepared for it or not. Morning breaks without ceremony, pale light cutting through a night that never truly ended. Phones buzz before alarms ring. Updates arrive in clipped messages, each one tightening the knot already lodged in the chest. This is a day when quiet work becomes visible, when decisions made in small rooms ripple outward into the open. The case is no longer dormant. It is awake, and it is moving fast. A vehicle pulls away from a curb where it has been parked for years, unnoticed, unremarkable. Inside, an individual who has lived most of a lifetime under the assumption that the past was safely buried now feels the weight of eyes that are no longer imaginary. Surveillance is subtle, legal, relentless. Every movement is noted, every deviation from routine logged with clinical precision. Patterns are what investigators look for, and patterns are hard to hide when you've grown comfortable. Back at headquarters, walls are covered with timelines refined to the minute. Lines intersect. Gaps shrink. What once felt like an unsolvable sprawl now resembles a corridor narrowing toward a single door. Analysts walk others through it, step by step, explaining how one detail reinforces another, how chance has been replaced by probability, how coincidence has run out of room to exist. There is a meeting that carries unusual gravity. Prosecutors listen without interruption as evidence is laid out again. This time not as a hypothesis, but as a sequence ready for court. Questions come sharper now. What if the defense argues contamination? What if memory is challenged? What if silence is framed as innocence? Each concern is met with documentation, with corroboration, with the kind of preparation born from knowing there will not be a second chance. Across town, the first official contact is made. It is courteous, calm, but it changes everything. The words are chosen carefully, designed to inform without revealing, to signal seriousness without tipping strategy. The recipient hears what is not being said, understands the implication immediately. The past, long ignored, has arrived uninvited. Reaction is measured at first, a nod, a practiced neutrality. But stress leaks through the seams. Hands fidget, breathing shifts. Answers come a half-second slower than they should. Investigators don't push yet. They let the silence stretch, allow discomfort to do what aggression never could. Silence has always been a weapon in this case. Now it's being turned around. News begins to circulate in fragments. Not headlines, not yet, but whispers. A reporter hears something from a courthouse clerk. A relative gets a call from someone they haven't spoken to in years. Social media lights up with speculation disguised as nostalgia. Old photos resurfacing, names being typed that haven't been spoken publicly since the Carter administration. The community feels the ground move beneath it. For the families, the emotional toll is immediate and brutal. Hope, long suppressed as a survival mechanism, comes roaring back with no warning. It collides with fear of disappointment, fear that this too will fade into nothing. They are careful with their words now. Careful with each other, afraid that speaking belief out loud might somehow jinx the fragile progress. Investigators prepare for escalation. Warrants are updated. Transportation is arranged. Every step is rehearsed, not because they expect chaos, but because they refuse to be surprised. The margin for error is gone. What remains is execution. The second interview is different. The tone has shifted. Evidence is introduced slowly, deliberately, not as an accusation, but as an invitation to explain. The subject tries. Stories emerge, polished by repetition, but they no longer fit the shape of the facts. Investigators don't interrupt. They let contradictions accumulate, stacking them gently, patiently, until the weight becomes impossible to ignore. There is a moment, small, almost invisible, when the balance tips. A question lands. A pause stretches too long. Eyes flick toward the table, away from the faces across it. In that instant, something breaks. Not completely. Not yet. But enough to confirm what everyone in the room already knows. This is no longer a search for truth. It is a negotiation with it. Outside, the day grows louder. Sirens in the distance. Doors opening and closing. A sense of inevitability settles in, heavy and unavoidable. Those involved feel it in different ways. Relief, dread, vindication, panic. But they all recognize it for what it is. The end game has begun. Paperwork is signed. Calls are placed. A decision is made that cannot be undone. The machinery of justice, once stalled by uncertainty and time, now moves with purpose. There is no celebration, no satisfaction yet. Only focus. only the understanding that the next steps will echo far beyond this moment. As evening approaches, the sky darkens again, mirroring the mood that has settled over everything. The case that waited in silence for decades is finally speaking in full sentences now, no longer content with hints or half-truths. And somewhere between the fading light and the coming night, the last illusion of safety disappears, replaced by the cold clarity of consequence. Night falls with a weight that feels deliberate, as if the sky itself understands what is about to happen. Streetlights flicker on one by one, illuminating roads that have carried ordinary lives for decades, never knowing they were part of a story that refused to die. Somewhere behind one of those lit windows, someone sits awake, replaying every decision ever made, every moment where a different choice might have changed the ending. Sleep is impossible now. The past is no longer distant. It's breathing down their neck. Inside the command center, the air is tight, electric. Conversations are low, efficient, stripped of emotion. Coffee goes untouched. No one wants shaky hands tonight. Screens glow with live feeds, satellite images, timestamps ticking forward with ruthless precision. This is not chaos. This is control. Years of waiting have led to these hours. The order comes quietly, not shouted, not dramatized, just a nod, a sentence spoken once. Everyone understands. Jackets are grabbed, radios clipped, doors open and close with soft finality. Vehicles roll out in sequence, headlights cutting to the dark like blades. The approach is methodical. No sirens, no spectacle. Tires hum against asphalt. Every turn is planned, every second accounted for. This isn't about speed. It's about certainty. The destination looms ahead, unremarkable, blending into the neighborhood as it always has. That's the cruel irony. Evil rarely announces itself. It hides behind normality, behind trim lawns and quiet routines. The knock is firm, professional. It echoes louder inside than it does outside. A pause. Footsteps. The door opens. Faces meet under harsh porch light. Time seems to slow, stretching the moment until it almost breaks. Words are spoken. Rights are read. The meaning lands heavy, unavoidable. This is no longer theoretical. This is real. Resistance never comes. There's no dramatic outburst, no sudden flight, just a visible collapse inward, shoulders sagging under the gravity of decades finally catching up. Hands extend without protest. Metal clicks softly. A sound so small, yet it reverberates across 46 years of silence. Inside the vehicle, the city slides past the windows, blurred and distant. The person inside stares straight ahead, jaw clenched, eyes empty. There is no triumph here, no release. Only the realization that the story they thought was over has been reopened, read aloud, and judged. At the station, the process continues with cold efficiency. Fingerprints taken, photographs snapped, paperwork completed, every step documented, every movement logged. This is how history becomes record, how memory transforms into evidence. Interrogation begins again, but this time the balance has shifted completely. The room feels smaller now, the walls closer. Evidence is no longer hypothetical. It sits on the table, undeniable, layered, interconnected. Questions are direct. Silence answers louder than words ever could. Outside, the news breaks, first as alerts, then as headlines, then as broadcasts cutting into regular programming. A cold case, a name, an arrest. The words ripple outward, hitting homes, bars, late-night diners. People stop mid-sentence. Screens are turned up, faces lean closer. Montana holds its breath. For the families, the call comes late. Too late to soften the blow, too important to delay. Voices shake as they deliver the news. There are tears, yes, but also something else. A strange, aching clarity. After decades of wondering if the truth would ever surface, it finally has. Not gently, not gradually, but all at once. Old wounds tear open, raw and bleeding, but beneath the pain is something solid. Validation. Confirmation that they were not wrong to keep asking, to keep pushing, to keep remembering when the world moved on. The silence that once crushed them has been broken. As dawn approaches, exhaustion sets in, but no one sleeps. Statements are drafted. Press conferences scheduled. Lawyers prepare. The system, once stalled, now surges forward, unstoppable. What was buried has been exhumed, and it refuses to be reburied. In the quiet hours before morning, one truth hangs in the air, undeniable and heavy. The past does not forget. It waits, and when it finally speaks, it does so with a voice loud enough to wake an entire state. Morning arrives without relief. The light creeps in through thin clouds, pale and indifferent, revealing a town that looks exactly the same yet feels fundamentally altered. Coffee brews in kitchens where radios murmur nonstop updates. Doors open, newspapers land on porches, headlines shouting what whispers carried through the night already confirmed. A name, an arrest, a case that refused to die has finally drawn blood from time itself. At headquarters, fatigue clings to every face, but no one slows down. This is the most dangerous moment now. Not the years of silence, not the dead ends, but the aftermath. Every word matters. Every document must align. The story has teeth, and it will bite if mishandled. Detectives move like machines fueled by adrenaline and habit, sorting evidence, replaying interviews, cross-checking details that once seemed insignificant. Now they glow with meaning. In the interview room, the atmosphere thickens. The questions begin again, sharper this time, stripped of courtesy. The voice across the table is calm, relentless, rehearsed through years of anticipation. Each answer is measured, each pause noted. Body language betrays what words refuse to confess. There is a rhythm to deception, and the room hears it clearly now. Evidence is laid out piece by piece, not rushed, not dramatized. A timeline rebuilt from fragments once dismissed as noise. A receipt, a phone call, a vehicle sighting that didn't fit until now. Each item clicks into place with a sound that feels louder than it should. The story tightens. The space for denial shrinks. Outside, reporters gather. Cameras point at doors that haven't opened yet. They trade rumors, speculate timelines, rehearse lines they'll deliver the second someone steps into view. This isn't just news, it's resurrection. A moment when the past refuses to stay buried and demands to be acknowledged by the present. For the families, the hours stretch painfully. Some sit alone, staring at walls that have held decades of grief. Others gather together. Strength found in proximity, in shared loss that now is shape again. Relief mixes with rage. Answers do not erase what was taken. They only confirm what was stolen, and who may have done it. The victim's name resurfaces everywhere, spoken carefully, respectfully, as if afraid to disturb the dead. Old photographs circulate again, smiles frozen in time, faces that never aged. A life paused abruptly in 1977, now dragged back into public consciousness. The community remembers who they were, not just how they died. Inside the system, legal wheels grind forward. Charges are reviewed, language scrutinized. Prosecutors lean over desks, weighing every option, understanding the weight of history pressing down on them. This isn't just a case. It's a reckoning. Lose here, and decades of trust collapse with it. The suspect is moved, escorted through corridors that echo with footsteps. No words are exchanged. The gravity of the moment renders conversation unnecessary. This is procedure now, impersonal, exacting. Justice does not need spectacle. It needs precision. As the day unfolds, more details leak. Not the full truth, but enough to deepen the shock. How close it all was. How many times the answer nearly surfaced. How silence, fear, and complacency built walls thick enough to hide a crime for almost half a century. The realization stings. This wasn't just about one person. It was about everyone who looked away. By afternoon, Montana feels different. Conversations slow. Eyes linger. There's an unspoken understanding that something sacred has been disturbed. Closure, long promised, reveals itself as complicated, uneven, and painful. Yet beneath it all, there is movement, progress, a sense that the dead have finally been heard. As evening approaches again, the lights come on, just as they did the night before. But this time, they illuminate a town wide awake. Staring into its own reflection, forced to confront the truth that time doesn't heal everything. Sometimes, it just waits for the right moment to expose what was hidden. And somewhere between the ticking clocks and the restless hearts, one fact settles in with chilling clarity. The silence that protected this secret for decades is gone. And what replaces it will change everything. Night falls again, heavier than before, pressing down on the town with a weight it hasn't felt in decades. Streetlights hum, insects scatter in cones of yellow light, and somewhere a siren wails. Not for this case, not anymore, but it still sounds like an echo from the past. The arrest has not brought peace. It has brought noise, questions, old wounds ripping open in the dark. Inside homes, televisions glow late into the night. The same footage loops endlessly. Grainy photographs from the 70s dissolve into modern mugshots. The contrast is brutal. Time has done its work on faces, but not on memory. Commentators speak with urgency. Their voices tight, careful, as if the wrong word could collapse everything. Cold case, breakthrough, decades of silence. Each phrase lands like a blow. At the station, the work does not slow. If anything, it accelerates. Boxes once shoved to the back of storage rooms are dragged into the light. Dust clouds rise, carrying the smell of paper and neglect. Files are open again, their edges brittle, margins filled with handwriting from detectives long retired or long dead. Every note is reread. Every assumption is questioned. The past is no longer untouchable. There is fear here, too, though no one says out loud. Fear that something was missed again. Fear that the truth is still incomplete. Fear that the case, so close to resolution, could fracture under scrutiny. This is where cold cases die a second time, under the weight of expectation. Interviews resume, this time with people who never thought they'd be asked anything again. Former neighbors, old coworkers, friends who drifted away when the questions became uncomfortable. Their voices shake as memories surface, blurred by years but sharpened by guilt. I should have said something. I thought it was nothing. I didn't want to get involved. Each confession lands softly, but together they form a deafening chorus of regret. Some stories contradict each other. Others align too neatly. Investigators listen without reacting, letting silence do the work. Silence has always been the most powerful tool in this case. It hid the crime. It buried the truth. Now it draws it out, piece by piece. The suspect sits alone for long stretches, time stretching and folding in on itself. The walls do not accuse. The clock does. Every tick marks another second closer to a confrontation that cannot be delayed forever. The past is no longer abstract. It has fingerprints. It has dates. It has names. Across town, the victim's family gathers again, this time not just to grieve, but to prepare. Courtrooms loom in their future. Testimony. Photographs they haven't seen in years. Details they try to forget. Justice asks for payment in memory, and the cost is high. Some welcome it. Others dread it. All of them are tired. Community meetings begin, hastily organized, overflow with people who need to talk. Anger surfaces, not just at the suspect, but at institutions, at neighbors, at themselves. How could this happen here? How did we miss it? Who else knew? The questions bounce off walls, unanswered, unsettling. Older residents speak in hushed tones, recalling rumors they were warned not to repeat. Younger ones listen in disbelief, realizing the place they grew up in carries shadows they were never told about. Montana's wide-open spaces suddenly feel smaller, closer, claustrophobic. The media digs deeper now. Not satisfied with the arrest alone, they chase context. They trace old relationships, financial records, movements across state lines. Patterns emerge, uncomfortable and undeniable. The case begins to resemble not a single act of violence, but a long chain of choices, enabled by indifference and fear. Late at night, detectives replay tapes, listening for what they didn't hear before. A hesitation, a voice cracking, a background sound that shouldn't be there. Technology bridges the decades, amplifying what was once lost to poor equipment and human error. The truth leaves fingerprints everywhere when you know how to look. Somewhere in the process, the story changes. It stops being about how the crime happened and becomes about why it was allowed to disappear. That question lingers longer, cuts deeper. Solving the case will not answer it fully. Nothing can. As dawn approaches, exhaustion sets in, but no one leaves. Coffee grows cold. Chairs creak. Eyes burn. This is the cost of waking the dead. They demand attention until the end. And beneath it all, a realization spreads quietly, inexorably. This case is no longer just about justice for one life lost in 1977. It is about the fragile nature of truth, about how easily it can be buried, and how violently it returns when disturbed. The silence is broken now, permanently, and there is no way back to the way things were before. Morning does not arrive gently. It crashes in with headlines, with phone alerts, with the sound of doors opening too fast. The town wakes up inside a story it can no longer control. Outside the courthouse, cameras line the steps before the sun has fully cleared the horizon. Tripods click into place like weapons being assembled. Reporters rehearse phrases that still feel unreal in their mouths. After all these years, breaking the case, arrest made, the words are sharp metallic. Inside, the building smells of old wood and disinfectant. Footsteps echo too loudly. Every sound feels amplified, as if the walls themselves are listening. Paperwork moves from desk to desk, stamped, signed, verified again and again. Procedure becomes ritual. This is how chaos is contained, by rules written long before anyone here was born. The suspect is brought through a side entrance, shielded from view, but the knowledge of their presence ripples outward. People feel it in their chests. Some hold their breath without realizing it. Others feel a strange, unwelcome relief. A shape has finally formed around a fear that lived here for decades. Fear is easier to face when it has a name. Investigators tighten their timeline. Hours become minutes. Movements once vague now lock into place. A gas receipt. A forgotten phone call logged on an old system. A witness who placed someone somewhere but never understood the significance until now. Each detail slides into position with a click that is both satisfying and horrifying. The picture is clearer. The picture is worse. In interview rooms, voices rise and fall. Not in anger, but in disbelief. People confront versions of themselves they no longer recognize. The younger self who didn't push harder, didn't ask again, didn't call the police when something felt wrong. Time has softened the memory, but not the guilt. Guilt does not age. It waits. The prosecution begins to shape the narrative, careful, deliberate. They know the defense will attack the gaps, the years, the silence. They know every assumption must be backed by something solid, especially now, especially after so long. Justice delayed is fragile. One wrong move, and it shatters. Evidence is photographed again, cataloged again. Items once dismissed are examined under new light, literal light, ultraviolet, microscopic. What once looked clean now tells a different story. What once looked insignificant now feels loud. The tiniest fibers speak. The smallest stains remember. Across town, the victim's name is spoken again, out loud, in public, by people who never knew them. It feels invasive to some, necessary to others. The name moves from whispers to print to broadcast, carried on voices that will never feel the full weight of it. But the weight exists anyway, pressing down on those who loved them, those who lost them, those who never stopped waiting. There is anger now, sharper than before. Not the explosive kind, but the cold, focused kind, directed at systems, at delays, at excuses. Why did it take this long? Why now? The answers are complicated, unsatisfying. Technology wasn't ready. Resources were thin. Leads dried up. People lied. People stayed quiet. The truth hid in plain sight, protected by time and human nature. The suspect breaks their silence briefly. Just a few words, carefully chosen. Enough to deny, not enough to explain. The sound of their voice sends a ripple through the room. It is ordinary. That is the most disturbing part. No monster growl. No cinematic confession. Just a person, aged, tired, standing at the center of a storm they once believed had passed. Outside, protesters gather. Some demand justice. Others demand restraint. The town splits along invisible lines, belief and doubt, trust and suspicion. Old friendships strain. New alliances form. Everyone has an opinion now. Everyone is an expert. The case becomes a mirror, reflecting more than it reveals. Late in the day, a single photograph circulates online. Not new, just newly noticed. A background figure. A shadow where no shadow should be. Investigators see it immediately. So do thousands of strangers. The internet hums, speculates, accelerates. Truth and noise blur together. The past is being excavated by too many hands at once. As night approaches again, exhaustion settles into bones. But sleep does not come easily. Not tonight. Too much is shifted. Too much is in motion. The case is alive now, breathing, demanding attention. It will not be ignored again. And somewhere in the quiet, beneath the sirens and the screens and the arguments, a single fact pulses steadily. The silence that protected this crime for decades is gone, replaced by something louder, more dangerous. The sound of truth struggling to be heard. Night pulls tight around the town like a lid snapping shut. Porch lights burn longer than usual. Curtain tweets. Conversations drop to whispers even behind locked doors. Everyone knows something is happening, something irreversible, and no one wants to be caught on the wrong side of it when morning comes. The arrest didn't end the story. It detonated it. Inside the sheriff's office, the lights stay on. Coffee goes cold on desks. Files lie open, pages curling at the edges from decades of handling. Investigators move slower now, not from fatigue, but from precision. Every step matters. Every word spoken from this point forward will echo in courtrooms, in headlines, in the memories of people who have waited far too long for answers. They replay interviews from years ago, grainy tapes, warped audio, voices of witnesses who sounded confident then, uncertain now. Some of them are gone, dead, unreachable, lost to time. Others are very much alive, and suddenly very nervous. Old statements don't line up anymore. Timelines fracture. What once felt like truth now feels like rehearsal. One investigator stops the tape abruptly. Silence fills the room. There it is. A pause. Too long. A breath held where it shouldn't be. A question that never got answered. Back then, it meant nothing. Now it feels like a confession that never found its voice. Across the hall, evidence lockers open with a metallic groan. Boxes are lifted out, labeled in fading ink. Dates from another era. Items collected with care, then shelved with resignation. A jacket, a tool, a personal object that once belonged to someone who never came home. Each piece carries weight, not just physical, but emotional. This is what was left behind. This is all that remained. Forensic analysts lean in close, faces illuminated by cold light. They speak softly, almost reverently. Science has moved on. What was impossible then is routine now. Samples once declared useless are suddenly invaluable. Data points emerge. Probabilities sharpen. The case is no longer built on gut feelings and witness impressions. It is built on numbers that do not lie, even when people do. The suspect's past unspools under scrutiny. Jobs held briefly. Moves that never made sense at the time. Relationships that ended abruptly without explanation. A pattern forms, subtle but undeniable. This was not a single mistake. This was a life lived in the margins, carefully avoiding attention, carefully staying ordinary. Monsters don't always roar. Sometimes they blend in. Word spreads faster than facts. A neighbor remembers a strange argument from years ago. A former co-worker recalls a sudden disappearance, a transfer no one could explain. These memories surface like debris after a flood, out of place, but impossible to ignore. The phone tip's line lights up. Some calls are useless. Some are cruel. A few are chillingly precise. The victim's family sits in a quiet room, away from cameras, away from speculation. They listen as investigators explain what has changed, what has been found, what might finally be proven. There are no cheers, no tears of joy, just a deep, aching stillness. Closure is a myth sold to people who have never lost someone this way. What exists instead is clarity, and clarity hurts. Outside, the town argues with itself. Social media fractures reality into camps. Innocent until proven guilty. We always knew. How could we miss this? Everyone rewrites their own history to make sense of the present. The truth is less comforting. Sometimes the signs are there, and sometimes they're invisible. Sometimes the system fails. Sometimes people fail each other. Late into the night, a breakthrough lands quietly without fanfare. A match, not just probable, conclusive, the kind that changes the temperature of a room. Conversations stop mid-sentence. Someone exhales slowly, as if they've been holding their breath for 40 years. This is it. The moment everything pivots around. But with certainty comes consequence. Warrants expand. New locations are searched. The scope widens. The question shifts from did this happen to how far did it go? Cold cases have a way of bleeding into each other. Threads crossing, secrets touching secrets. Investigators know this. They brace for it. As dawn approaches again, the town is different. Not healed, not at peace, but altered. The past has been disturbed, and it will not settle quietly. Too many questions remain. Too many lives brush against this moment without knowing it. And somewhere in a holding cell, the suspect sits alone with the sound of doors locking and unlocking, with the knowledge that time, once their greatest ally, has finally turned against them. The silence that protected them has evaporated, replaced by a noise they cannot escape. The slow, relentless drumbeat of accountability. Morning doesn't arrive gently. It breaks over the town like an interrogation light, harsh and unavoidable. News vans line the streets near the courthouse, engines idling, satellite dishes angled toward the sky, as if waiting for permission to speak. Reporters rehearse the same sentences again and again, polishing words that will never fully explain what decades of silence have done to this place. The headline is already written in the public imagination. What's missing is the soul of it. Inside the courthouse, footsteps echo with unnatural clarity. Every sound feels amplified. Paper shuffling, doors closing, a cough quickly stifled. The building has stood here longer than most of the people now filling it, and it has absorbed countless versions of truth, lies, and half-confessions. Today, it prepares to hold another. Investigators move with restrained urgency. There is no chaos now, no scrambling. This phase demands discipline. Evidence must speak louder than outrage. Timelines are refined down to minutes. Phone records, once thought irrelevant, now form a lattice of movement and intent. A call made too late. Another placed too early. Small anomalies that only matter when stacked together, forming a picture that cannot be unseen. The suspect is brought in through a side entrance. No dramatic confrontation. No shouted accusations. Just a soft clink of restraints and the shuffle of shoes across old tile. They look smaller than expected. Older. Time has not been kind, but it has been protective. Until now, cameras catch only fragments. An expressionless face, eyes fixed forward, jaw tight. Not defiant. Calculating. In an interview room painted a color meant to calm, questions begin again. Some are familiar. Others are new, sharpened by evidence that didn't exist a year ago, let alone 40. The suspect answers cautiously, sticking to a script memorized long ago. But scripts decay, memory erodes, and pressure reveals cracks. A detective slides a folder across the table. No words, just photographs, data, a report stamped with authority. The air changes. There's a moment, brief, almost imperceptible, when the suspect's composure falters. A blink held too long. A swallow. The body reacts before the mind can catch up. Elsewhere, prosecutors build their case brick by brick. They know what they have, and they know what they still need. Circumstantial becomes compelling when anchored by science. Motive is inferred, not declared. Opportunity is mapped. The story is assembled not for drama, but for durability. This is the last under attack. The victim's name is spoken again and again, no longer as a memory, but as a legal presence. Files that once gathered dust now command attention. Their life is reconstructed in painful detail. Friends interviewed. Habits documented. Final movements charted with forensic precision. The goal is not to sensationalize, but to restore dignity. To remind everyone that this case began with a person, not a puzzle. In the town, reactions splinter. Some feel vindicated. Others feel betrayed by their own instincts. A few refuse to believe any of it, clinging to the comfort of the familiar over the discomfort of truth. Long-held loyalties strain under the weight of facts. Conversations end abruptly. Old friendships cool. A former witness is brought back in, hands trembling as they sign a new statement. What they once withheld now spills out, unburdened by the fear that kept it locked away for decades. Regret is a powerful accelerant. So is age. People nearing the end of their lives sometimes decide they no longer want to carry secrets forward. The past resurfaces in unexpected ways. A box found in an attic, a letter never sent, a memory triggered by a face on television. Each revelation is examined carefully, skeptically. Investigators have learned the cost of believing too quickly, but some details fit too perfectly to ignore. They slot into place with a quiet finality. As the case tightens, the suspect's world shrinks. Options disappear. Alibis collapse under scrutiny. The calm facade erodes, replaced by irritation, then anger. Questions are met with silence. Silence is met with evidence. The rhythm is relentless. This is not a battle of wills. It is a countdown. At night, the town doesn't sleep easily. The arrest has reopened wounds that never truly healed. People drive past places they hadn't thought about in years, suddenly seeing them differently. Ordinary corners now feel haunted. The landscape itself seems complicit, having kept its secrets too well. In the quiet hours before dawn, a decision is made. Charges are formalized. Paperwork is signed with steady hands. The weight of it settles across the room. This is the point of no return. There will be no more speculation, no more waiting for one last piece. The system moves forward, carrying the past with it. And as the sun rises once more, it illuminates a town standing at the edge of revelation, bracing for what the truth will demand when it finally speaks out loud. The day of reckoning does not announce itself with thunder. It arrives quietly, almost politely, as if aware of how long it has waited. The courthouse fills again, but this time the energy is different. No speculation, no theories whispered in corners. The air is heavy with certainty, the kind that presses down on the chest and makes every breath deliberate. The suspect stands as charges are read aloud. Each word lands with precision, echoing off walls that have heard promises broken and truths delayed. There's no dramatic outburst, no collapse, just a rigid stillness, a face carved into something unreadable. For a moment, it is impossible to tell whether this is shock, denial, or the final acceptance of a story that can no longer be controlled. Prosecutors speak carefully. They do not rush. They know this case has outlived careers, outlasted technology, survived neglect and doubt. They explain how a fragment of evidence, dismissed for decades, found new life under modern scrutiny. How time, once the enemy, became the ally. How silence, once impenetrable, finally fractured. The courtroom listens as timelines are reconstructed one final time, movements aligned, lies exposed not by emotion, but by math, by chemistry, by data that does not forget. The narrative is no longer a mystery. It is a sequence, cold, methodical, unavoidable. In the gallery, the victim's family sits together, hands clasped tightly, knuckles white. They have waited longer than anyone should be asked to wait. Their grief has aged with them, reshaping itself over the years, never leaving, only changing form. Today, it sharpens again, cutting through the numbness with something dangerously close to relief. Outside, the town holds its breath. Phones buzz with alerts. Radios repeat the same lines. Decades of rumors collapse into a single, undeniable truth. Some residents feel anger rise, others shame. Many feel both. The realization spreads quietly. The danger was never abstract. It was familiar. It lived nearby. It blended in. When the judge speaks, the room seems to contract. The words are formal procedural, but their impact is seismic. This is not just the closing of a case. It is the reopening of history. A correction written in ink where there was once only speculation. The accused is led away, footsteps fading down the corridor. No one applauds. No one celebrates. Justice, when it comes this late, does not feel triumphant. It feels heavy, necessary, final. As the courtroom empties, investigators linger. They exchange looks that say more than words ever could. This case followed them home, haunted their sleep, shaped their careers. Now it is over, not erased, not forgotten, just resolved. That night, the town is quieter than usual. Porch lights glow longer. Curtains remain slightly open. People sit with their thoughts, replaying memories, questioning instincts, wondering what else time has buried. The landscape hasn't changed, but perception has. Every shadow carries new meaning. The victim's name is spoken one last time on the evening news. Not as a question, not as a plea, but as a statement. Their story, once suspended in uncertainty, now has an ending. Not a happy one, but a true one. And somewhere between the past and the present, between what was lost and what was finally found, the silence that lasted nearly half a century breaks completely, leaving behind an echo that will never fully fade.